Good morning, grade 6. I hope you're doing well this week. Welcome back to week 7 of online learning. This week, beginning from this week, we'll be starting with a new block of learning. We are moving away from fictional horror texts. We're done with the scary stories. We're moving into poetry for the next 4 weeks. So, in the upcoming weeks, you'll be discovering and learning new types of poetry. So, let's go ahead and get started. To start off with, we're going to do a warm-up activity as always, through which you're going to try to guess what the learning outcomes might be. So watch the following videos of familiar movies that are one of your favorites and think about the questions that follow. Let's start.
As representatives of the host school, I expect each and every one of you to put your best foot forward, and I mean this literally because the Yule Ball is first and foremost a dance. Silence! The House of Godric Gryffindor has commanded the respect of the wizard world for nearly 10 centuries. I will not have you in the course of a single evening besmirching that name by behaving like a babbling, bumbling band of baboons.
Yes. So, the professor in Harry Potter said two things here. She said she wants the students to put their best foot forward when the guests come. And she also doesn't want them to behave like a babbling, bumbling band of baboons. So, looking into these two statements, do you think that she means these two statements literally? If she doesn't really mean them literally, what is she trying to say through these statements? Try to think about them. Let's move on to the second video.
When you were young and your heart was an open book, you used to say, live and let live.
You're in.
Same questions. Here in Shrek, the song says, it sings with the lyrics, you were young and your heart was an open book. What does the author of this song mean by your heart was an open book? Does he mean it literally or does he have another meaning behind it? Video number 3.
Information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think.
Example?
Example? Okay, ogres are like onions.
They stink?
Yes. No.
Oh, they make you cry?
No.
Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white hairs.
No. Layers. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers.
Even though Donkey was very reluctant to understand this part, but Shrek was trying to compare ogres to onions. What does he mean by that? He said that both onions and ogres have layers. Does he literally mean that ogres have layers that you can peel off? Or does he mean something else? Think about all of these questions through the 3 videos and come back to this question. What do you think the lesson will be about? The learning outcomes of this lesson. Number 1, identify the 3 figures of speech in text, similes, metaphors, and symbols. Number 2, determine author's meaning behind the usage of similes, metaphors, and symbols. And finally, differentiate between similes, metaphors, and symbols in texts. So the 3 elements that were included in the learning outcomes, similes, metaphors, and symbolism, they come under the bigger title of figures of speech. So before moving on to the 3 elements, let's look into what figures of speech are. I'm sure you have heard thousands of figures of speech throughout the duration of your life. Definition: a figure of speech is anything you would say or write that you do not mean literally. Examples: I could eat a horse. or I've told you a million times. The first figure of speech that we will be covering in this lesson is simile, very familiar to all of you. By definition, a simile is a figure of speech that makes a comparison, showing similarities between two different things. A simile draws resemblance comparison with the help of the words like or as. So whenever you see the two and they are comparing between two items, you would identify a simile in the text. Therefore, it is a direct comparison. We can find simile examples in our daily speech. We often hear comments like, John is as slow as a snail. Examples. At exam time, the 6th grade student was as busy as a bee. So here, the grade 6 student's hard work was being compared to the busyness of a bee. When the examination finished, the candidate felt as light as a feather. So the candidate was as relaxed and as light as a feather. When the teacher entered the class, the 6th grade students, were fighting like cats and dogs. Your turn to try out similes in sentences. I will display 3 sentences where there are similes of 2 objects being compared. Try to identify the 2 objects being compared and also the signal word. Whenever I read the sentence and finish with the example, pause the video, perform the example, and then come back to the video to check your answer. Make sure you practice. The truth was like a bad taste on his tongue. What's being compared here, and what is it being compared to? The truth is being compared to the unpleasantness of a bad taste. The signal word here is the word like. The people who still lived in the town were stuck in place like wax statues. What's being compared here? Detect the signal word to make it easier for you. The people are being compared to the stillness of wax statues, to how fixed they are. And the last one. My mother's kitchen was like a holy place. You couldn't wear your shoes, you had to sit there at a certain time and occasionally would pray. The mother's kitchen is being compared to the sacredness of a holy place. And the signal word is again like. So why do we use similes? Why do writers want to complicate things and use similes? Function of similes. Using similes makes sentences more interesting and deeper, and it attracts the attention of readers and listeners, encouraging their imaginations to understand what is being communicated. Metaphor. The second figure of speech that we will be covering in this lesson is metaphor. They're very similar to the previous figure of speech, similes, and they're also very familiar to you. Looking into the definition, a metaphor is a figure of speech that makes an implicit or hidden comparison between two things that are unrelated but which share some common characteristics. In simple English, when you portray a person, place, thing, or an action as being something else, even though it is not actually that something else, you are speaking metaphorically. The following phrase is an example of a metaphor. My brother is the black sheep of the family. So my brother is not exactly a black sheep. How can he be? But what I mean is that my brother probably does not follow the rules in the family and probably does not fit in with the rest of the family. However, the metaphor figure of speech is different from a simile because we do not use like or as to develop a comparison. It makes an implicit or hidden comparison and not an explicit or a clear one. Let's look into some examples. All of us speak, write, and think in metaphors. We cannot avoid them. For example, my brother was boiling mad. He was so heated, just like boiling water. The assignment was a breeze. The assignment went by so smoothly and was very easy, just like a gentle breeze. It is going to be clear skies from now on. It means that all troubles will fade away, just like a clear sky without any clouds in it. Her voice is music to the ears. Her voice is very gentle and pleasant to hear. Now it's your turn to try practicing metaphor. You are required to stop the video whenever I read the sentences and then try to practice identifying the metaphors. The detective listened to her tales with a wooden face. So what is being compared here? The detective's face was compared to the passiveness of a wood. Number 2. I was lost in a sea of nameless faces. What two things are being compared here? And how are they being compared? The crowd of unfamiliar people was compared to the largeness of the sea. Number 3. John's answer to the problem was just a band-aid, not a solution. So what two things are being compared? And what characteristics is common between them? John's answer did not fix the problem, just as a band-aid wouldn't cure a deep cut. What are metaphors used for? Using metaphors appeals to the senses of listeners or readers, sharpening their imagination to understand what is being communicated to them. The third figure of speech that we will be covering in this lesson is symbolism. This one might be a bit more new to you. By definition, symbolism is the use of symbols to demonstrate ideas by giving them symbolic meanings that are different from their actual meaning. Symbolism can take different forms. Generally, it is an object representing another to give an entirely different meaning that is much deeper and more significant. For instance, smile is a symbol of friendship. Let's look into some examples. Rebels raised a white flag to negotiate. A white flag is usually associated with peace and peacemaking. The Muslim forces raised their flag with a crescent on it. A crescent symbolizes Islam. They dressed in black to the funeral of their friend. The color black is usually associated with grief and death. He gave a red rose to his wife on Valentine's Day. Red rose usually symbolizes love, romantic love. And finally, you have a sixth sense like an owl. An owl represents wisdom. Now it's your turn to try symbolism. These are some examples from Harry Potter. I will ask you a couple of questions and you try to figure them out, what the symbol behind it might be. Let's see how much of a Harry Potter fan you are. What does Harry's scar represent on his forehead? Pause the video here, brainstorm and come back. Harry's scar is symbolic for his bravery, like a badge of honor. After all, he survives major battle after major battle. What does Albus Dumbledore's name represent? Do you know? Albus Dumbledore's name is a symbol of his personality. Dumbledore means bumblebee in Old English, and he liked to hum. Albus means white, which may symbolize a white wizard or a good wizard. So why do we really use symbolism in our texts, in our writings? Symbolism in literature sparks interest in readers as they find a chance to get inside the writer's mind and see how he views the world. Difference between simile, metaphor, and symbolism. Simile is a direct comparison between two things using the words like or as. For example, she was fast asleep as peaceful as a dove. Metaphor, an indirect comparison between two things that are unrelated but share a common characteristic. She was a dove sleeping peacefully. Symbolism, a sign that replaced an idea or an object. The dove is a symbol of peace. Introduction to the text. We will be reading poetry for the next 4 weeks, as I told you in the beginning of the slideshow. This week we will be reading a poem titled See It Through by Edgar Guest. It is about persevering through challenges and overcoming obstacles. If you want to read more poems and you like poetry, you can find a lot of poetry at familyfriendpoems.com. Happy reading!